My name is Daniel. I'd like to talk about approaching these AI projects. The technology that Vadim is talking about is what he calls the sizzle on the steak. It's kind of the latest and the greatest. It's the thing that probably brought you guys in here. It's generative AI. It's LLMs. But AI is broad, and I invite everybody to understand that AI as a term includes a lot of different use cases. So when approaching AI projects, advanced analytics projects, there's a methodology. I want to mention some of these points. So the things I'll talk about: AI maturity, which is the highest level of analytical maturity. And this is something, if you've heard us speak before, maybe you've heard this elsewhere, analytical maturity is part of an organization's journey in making value with their data in general. And obviously today we see LLMs are doing quite advanced things to generate business value with your data. So that's what makes it the highest level of analytical maturity. Within that journey is AI readiness. It's a conversation, and I'm going to focus in depth on what that is. And then the classic conversation about where does this technology live, cloud versus on-prem. This is a conversation that's always in consideration when we actually want to put our hands into developing and operationalizing these kinds of technologies. I'd like to start with the quote. Vadim doesn't like the quote. I like the quote. Every team in your organization is looking for an AI-powered experience. However, it's not as easy as turning it on. Maybe turning on Microsoft Copilot, everything's solved. Maybe yes, maybe no. Delivering a great AI experience requires time, experience, and data. These three things will pop up when I talk about lessons learned, which is why I like the quote. And when we approach these lessons learned, we're approaching them from a what didn't work. And you'll see that these three things come up, and I'll make sure I mention them in detail. So, maturity, analytical, AI, maturity. When it comes to analytical maturity, the most immature spectrum is you're dealing with your Excel files. You don't really have a good, strong grasp of getting your organizational data available for different analytical workloads. That means that before you do AI, you need a foundational level. And I'll talk about what this level is in detail, but the data is accessible, you have data strategy, you have data governance, and your organization has data literacy. At this level, you can start considering AI initiatives, right? If you're still fiddling with Excel files, or your data is in silos and it's kind of hard to even put a report together, AI is going to be challenging. That's the claim. Then from here, right, we bridge into the steps of AI maturity. The first one being awareness, which is the conversations around it, and I'm going to go into detail what this looks like. It is specific to a service offering, the first service offering that we like to touch upon with our clients. From here, from the conversations, we then experiment. We then put it into production. We then consider AI in every next service, product, project, and then the cliche, it's part of your DNA, which I laugh at. But maybe we get there. Maybe you have that utopia that Vadim said where you have agents for absolutely everything. But it's a journey, and we'll be talking about the first steps, starting with 0. That foundational level of maturity. So the claim here, the first one, data accessibility. Your organizational data needs to be easily accessible for analytical workloads. Analytical workloads can be everything from a BI report to a machine learning model to a contextualized generative AI model, an LLM. All of these we consider analytical workloads, and the data, which is the heart of any analytical workload, needs to be easily accessible to address the business needs. Next is data strategy. This is a broad term. Our take on it is that these data initiatives need to align with the business goals, and there have to be enough resources, monetary, human resources, technology resources, to sustain these long term. Governance. Again, a key word pops up in a lot of conversations. It is also needed, a degree of governance is needed for the purpose of data integrity, which is quality, security, ownership, compliance, if that fits your scenario. All of these things standardizes the data practice across your organization. These are self-evident, right? They're probably the first ones you might think of if you say, an organization that has their data together has these three things, but the one that is often overlooked is data literacy. And this is about your employees, about the human resources you have and their ability to know the value that data has and the value that it can bring to them, the ways in which they can use it. They can think one step ahead, right? They say, I think I can make a forecast. I understand how data works. I could probably make a forecast for this. We could probably put this in a chatbot. We could probably do things this way. That literacy comes as you mature, right? If you're fiddling with Excel files, you're probably not going to think outside the box, but when you have all your data easily accessible, people have shown successful use cases within your organization, your employees, you'll feel it. They'll say, you know what? Let's go for the next project. And change management also will be easier this way. Didn't realize I went to the next slide. All right, so awareness. After we have this foundational level of maturity, the first step is awareness. Now, this is a fluid kind of intro of having the first conversations. Now, again, I'm going to talk about lessons learned, and a lot of them, even start here in awareness. Mistakes can be made in this awareness phase. You want to get this right. What are the key components of this awareness phase? In order. First one is understanding AI technology. Now, that might sound like a joke, because here we are, and every single presentation here is about AI, and I'm saying you need to first understand AI, but we mean that because AI is broad, AI is complex, and there are experts in AI for a reason. And one needs to understand, as a customer, as an organization, one needs to understand the ways in which AI truly work as a technology before considering the use cases. So if you understand it as a technology, you can then look internally and say, for these business use cases, actually, now that I know that this works and how it works, I can use this, I can use this, I can use this, or potentially. So in terms of ordering, we need to first understand the technology before looking internally at the use cases. From there, we can create a feasibility and complexity assessment. What is it really going to take? Tech, money. Build a roadmap from here. And finally, I'm going to reiterate data literacy, organizational leadership. So everybody needs to be on board. A lot of people need to be on board because this is going to touch a lot of people. Introducing AI is not, a walk in the park. It has change management implications. It requires organizations to understand why is it possibly, replacing a certain task of mine, et cetera, et cetera. So these make up the kind of step-by-step pieces to awareness. We have a service offering called AI Readiness, where we have these initial conversations with our customer. We help them understand the potential of AI, the different ways. We help understand the business use case and connect those dots. Our team is a business-focused as well as tech-focused team. So we want to understand what the business use case is and really how is the technology going to help you. Now, the cliche conversation of cloud versus on-prem, there's some points I want to touch upon here. Going from 2, 3, 4, 5, when you actually get our hands dirty, the technology needs to live somewhere. You might ask yourself, where should it live? Cloud, on-prem, what are the considerations? I'll start with a simple graph. On the x-axis, we have GPU consumption. On the y-axis, we have total cost. Now, you would approach this with what is the GPU consumption that we need? What is the scale of this project? If you're starting, you're experimenting, it's probably low. When you have it, all together, it's mature, it's large, you'll be on the right side of the scale. And you can quickly see that if cost is your, let's say, approaching a variable, your consideration, then at low GPU consumptions, cloud would be the cheaper option. There is an inflection point where hybrid is worth considering. And then at the highest scales, the argument is that on-prem becomes cheaper again. Now, as a company, ITI, as a department, data and AI, we've partnered on both sides of the spectrum. Microsoft for the cloud side, NVIDIA for the on-premise side, although you can make the argument that NVIDIA powers everything anyways. We're on both sides. When it comes to actually implementing, we can help have this conversation. As IT people, it's one of the first questions I get asked, where are we going to do this and why? Some additional points to the where and why. Again, if we take that GPU consumption or AI scale, early on, cloud, some of the tools that we see in Azure, Copilot Studio, Azure AI Services, Microsoft Fabric, Databricks, others as well. We're aware that the cloud is able to connect to a lot of different services. It's built that way. And eventually, if in on-prem, NVIDIA AI Factory, which is something that Vadim is happy to discuss in more detail, is our kind of approach to that on-premise solution. You might see these kinds of, these are bullet points just to make mention. Experimentation phase is where you'd be, in the cloud, have a low AI scale. It's where there is sporadic GPU usage, therefore variable costs. It's usually early adoption phase. You're usually exploring pre-trained models as opposed to a large scale where it's operationalized. The GPU consumption is consistent, therefore your costs are much more stable, linear, and you might be training your own models at this point. Now, there is a claim, why would one maybe start with on-premise if you want to ensure data sovereignty or you prefer an OpEx cost structure? These are reasons why you might actually start on-premise. So it's not, there's not one answer for everything, some considerations that might cause you to explore on-premise earlier than usual. So, I made mention of some of the lessons learned, or that I will be alluding to them. Our advanced analytics AI projects with our customers have led to 4 kind of summaries I'd like to share with you today. The first one is with a customer in the financial sector. So I'm going to make a claim, then what the key takeaway is. I'll probably add some context around the use case itself. Here, business alignment and collaboration was insufficient and too late. This caused weakened value perception of the prototype, or the MVP, and so it struggled to move to production. So the use case here was to scan documents and scan tax documents into structured data automatically. We had the business use case quite clear. We had the executive sponsorship. But when it actually came time from the tech kind of driven, IT driven project, when it came time to present it to the business, again, while we had all those other things that are needed, the business was like, didn't know that this is something that we're really doing. Didn't know that I might now need to use this. I wasn't brought into the conversations early enough. And I say that the value perception, the way that they could have perceived it, wasn't as strong as it could have been. And that meant that the funding to move it into production was kind of lackluster. It was I never asked for it in the first place, or I wasn't in the conversation in the first place. From our perspective, the technology was great, the solution was great, but the takeaway here is that early business alignment wasn't there. So, takeaway, bring in the business people in early, the people who in the end will consume it, which you can argue is business people in the end, or the business side. So bring them in early, collaborate with them early. It will help with the value perception of the project, help it be successful, help the ROI really be digested. Next, telecom customer sprinted into their AI journey. So I make that argument of awareness is an important step. This is an example of a failed awareness period. They purchased AI products before truly understanding the ways that AI works and the use cases that might be applied. So they had a product, an AI product, and they were ready to go crazy and solve all the use cases. But really, it only answered one of the 10 use cases. And they weren't aware that it could only answer one of the 10 use cases because they didn't go through that process thoroughly. So the argument here is to go through that awareness step and to validate the AI's potential and understand the technology thoroughly before trying to sprint and buy things and think it will solve your use cases. It's quite particular technology and expertise is needed and these conversations are needed. Next, this one's probably the most cliche. Garbage in, garbage out. So building a classification model for a public sector customer, the prototype, the MVP, never obtained the accuracy that it needed to be valuable, to then say, okay, this is what we want it to be and we can move it to the next phase. The reason for that was the data is dirty. And any of those that have spoken to a data scientist, the cliche is they spend more time cleaning data than actually doing data science work. The argument stands, we keep seeing it for a reason. One needs to have a strong data foundation. And that, in this case, was quality, but it is as well all the other things, like strategy and governance and literacy. All these things can break or limit the ability for a prototype to be successful. Finally, this was a generative AI project for a company in the industrial sector. So they have a production line. They have machinery. This machinery fails. Whenever it fails, there's a group of people who go through physical, handwritten logs as well as digital logs about previous failures of this machinery for them to troubleshoot. It takes time. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. A contextualized chatbot developed to help them get that answer quicker, right? Because it's really, this thing broke and they want to know why. If a chatbot can be contextualized across all of this log, this historical data, that was the use case. The issue here was that a MVP, a solution, a prototype, worked, but it was built on static data. And productionalizing it was such a jump that was not well calculated in terms of what would it really take to be tapped into near real-time data. You can imagine static to near real-time has such a jump of requirements. When it was originally scoped by the company internally, it wasn't done well, causing a deadlock, we have this nice, prototype, but jumping to productionization, to operationalization is so large we don't have that expertise internally to make it happen. It stayed there, it stayed stale. Until we showed up to help them, we had to go backwards. We had to bring sufficient technical depth. The argument here, building that sufficient technical depth is essential to avoid long-term project stagnation. So a lot of variables I've mentioned to the success. It might be overwhelming, but we wanted to show a handful of obvious, not so obvious ways in which projects fail. So that's what I had to share with you guys today. Hopefully it was insightful. I'm going to pass the mic back to the clicker. We have our own mics. To Vadim, thank you for your attention today.